Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and today I want to share with you my thoughts on teaching versus disciplining. So the question about how I discipline my children has come up a lot, and so I thought I would take the opportunity to share some of my thoughts on discipline, specifically in our family, and discipline in general. Now, the first thing is that I really dislike the word discipline. I feel that it has a negative connotation, and it seems like it's been used interchangeably with punishment, and really that's not the purpose of discipline in our home, and really we don't even use that word. We use teaching, or we just use consequences. So to begin with, what would be the difference between discipline as a punishment versus discipline as a teaching tool? Well, discipline as a punishment, I don't feel is really going to solve the problem. And I just don't think that it's good for a parent-child connection, and it's just not something that we were raised with or that we intend to do. So how do we get our kids to do anything in that case if there is no discipline? Well, there is discipline in the form of teaching and in the form of consequences. So there's a couple of things that came about in order to make this work. The first thing is that using discipline as a tool for teaching means that whatever is going on with your child, that you're using that opportunity to teach your child how to behave, or how to mostly behave correctly, behave respectfully, or just do what your parents have told you to do. And so when the children are really young, like 2 or 3, just accepting that children aren't going to listen as much as you would like is really important, because if you're constantly telling them something to do and they are not listening to you over and over and over again, you're actually creating a really bad habit of disobedience. Now, creating habits of obedience is something that I learned from the Charlotte Mason philosophy. There are 6 volumes of original text that I highly encourage you to read. They are phenomenal, not just for parenting, but for education as well. And one of those principles is about teaching obedience, and that you only tell your child something, whether it's something that you want them to listen to or to do, that you expect them or that you anticipate that they will do. So for instance, if you want your child to close the door, don't say close the door unless you really mean that you want your child to close the door. And don't say it unless you anticipate that he will actually do it. Because if he doesn't do it, number one, he is learning how to not listen, and you're creating a bad habit of disobedience. And the other thing is that it's a little bit disrespectful if an adult or a parent tells a child to do something and the child doesn't listen. And so you are now actually teaching a really wrong concept rather than teaching something good, and that's to listen and to follow through and to have good behavior. And so then how do you go about doing this? If you anticipate your child is never going to do anything, how do you go about doing this? Well, the first thing is that you only say the words that you definitely want your child to follow through with. If you're saying a bunch of things like, oh, I think the door should be closed, don't you think it's too hot, we should close the door, or just a lot of extra words to describe what you actually want to do, you are causing your child to have to sift through all of that information to get to the action and to get to what the important part of that information is. So when you need your child to actually do something, it's important that you use simple sentences that are very direct and that you intend for your child to follow through with. So what happens if your child doesn't follow through with whatever it is you're asking your child to do? Well, usually the natural consequences are the best teaching tool. Sometimes the child doesn't clock that there are natural consequences, and the parent has to explain or illuminate those natural consequences. So for instance, let's just take something that seems to be kind of a challenge with a lot of families, and especially with mine when my children were much younger. Getting out of the house was always stressful and complicated. Children needed their shoes, maybe shoes and socks, and maybe a snack or a jacket and a water bottle. And over time, it just was really overwhelming to manage all those things. And then I decided I wasn't going to remind my children to get all those things. They would just have to do it on their own. And guess what? It took a little while, but I don't tell them anymore to remember to bring any of those things. If they anticipate being thirsty, they'll bring a water bottle, and if they forget it, then they'll be a little bit thirsty, or they'll have to drink from a drinking fountain, or they'll ask me for a little bit of mine, and sometimes I'll say, yes, have some, and then sometimes they'll say, just have a little bit, because we all have to share out of one water bottle. But the whole idea of not having to remind my kids and just be on them about it, it just created some personal natural consequences when they would forget something. Like if they forgot their jacket and we went grocery shopping and it's really cold in a grocery store, then they were cold and we would try to speed through. It's not like we want to impose hardship on our children at the same time. So those natural consequences were reminders, but they were gentle reminders. They weren't harsh. And they definitely weren't punishments either. They weren't discipline in the form of a punishment because they didn't do such and such behavior. All right, so when your children are really young, they're likely not to listen to you so often. And so rather than constantly nagging them or telling them or punishing them for doing usually what's pretty natural for really young children, I recommend having a yes environment. And I learned this from the Dr. Sears discipline book. And I really, really enjoyed that book. I had it many years ago. I've since passed it on, but it is a gem. And it goes through multiple different techniques on how to, like different discipline techniques. And my favorite one was the yes environment because it just seemed to be really gentle and really simple. And so a yes environment is basically creating an environment where you don't have to tell your child no, or don't do that, or don't touch that. Now, you may think, well, then your child is never going to know how to listen to you if you say no, and that's really not the case. Because a yes environment works really, really well when the children are really young. So telling a 2-year-old not to touch the TV or not to touch that vase with that plant in it is just not likely, and you're going to end up really stressed out, constantly telling your child to not touch or to not do, especially if it's in your own home. So create an environment that is safe for that child to do what he needs to do as a young child seems to be the best option in relieving stress as a parent and also cultivating obedience in a very subtle way. As your children get older, you as a parent will naturally know when it's time to add a little bit more firmness. And for me, it happens around the age of 5. Now there's a transition between 3 and 5 where I sort of feel out. Like if I say something that I anticipate the child doesn't want to do, I'll feel it out and see, like, will it work or will it not work? Because if I spend 2 years telling my children something and they're just not going to listen, I'm going to get really frustrated. And again, my children are going to learn the negative habit of disobedience. So if I'm constantly telling my child to put on his shoes before we leave the house and he's never doing it, well, I'm just going to pick up my child with his shoes and then go to the car. There's no reason for us to both be in tears because of it. So I'm just going to find a solution that usually goes around the problem until the children are old enough so that we can go head on with that as a solution, not as a problem. So when my children are older and there isn't a problem putting on their shoes, then I'm not having that tension anymore. Also, you can just do easy shoes like slip-ons, Velcro, or flip-flops, and you can avoid some of the hassle that goes along with shoes that are really difficult to put on or shoes with laces. So I'm always looking for the easier route around these things. And you may think, well, that's not a good idea because in life you're not going to have easy routes, and in life you're going to have to learn how to do X, Y, and Z. And while that is true, I feel like while children are still growing and learning, having a more peaceful environment, I feel would mean that they would be more apt to learning those things and following through with them. Now, it's not always a peaceful environment because parenting is really, really challenging at times, and we all lose our cool at one time or another. So it's not to say that all these techniques are going to have these beautiful, happy children all the time and, smiling mom and dad all the time. That's certainly not the case, but I really do feel that it will alleviate a lot of the stresses that maybe you have been carrying around because you're expecting your 3-year-old to act like an 8-year-old, or you're expecting your 7-year-old to act like a 12-year-old. And that's just not fair for the child, and that's definitely not fair for you as the parent because that's going to be really exhausting. So as the children have gotten older, the idea of listening to the parent or listening to other adults or respecting other adults is really important to us. And it's not that we as parents haven't made our set of mistakes, because we certainly have. And it's not that our children don't, on occasion, behave in a way that may be interpreted as disrespectful or they bicker or whatever happens. Like, I think that's all natural. I think we are constantly growing and constantly learning from our mistakes, and same with our children. And to give us a break once in a while as a parent, like, give yourself a break and don't be so hard on yourself because this parenting journey is really difficult. All right, so natural consequences as children get older. I could tell you my natural consequences, but I don't think that's as effective as you just honing in onto something that's going to work with you and your child. So if there is something that you are just really frustrated at because your child just really isn't doing, then I really highly suggest that you check out one of two books. One is the Discipline book by Dr. Sears, which is especially good for younger children. And the next set of books is the ones by Charlotte Mason. Her 6-volume original volume set is phenomenal. I do highly recommend that you go to the original source for this one and avoid reading some of the books that are that are Charlotte Mason inspired, but not the original text. The original texts are especially amazing. All right, so one of the Charlotte Mason principles that I want to reiterate is that of obedience and habits. The chapters on habits are amazing. They are life-changing. When you want to cultivate a behavior or a character trait, spending a little bit of time honing in on that and working on it is going to be your best bet at having that trait for your child. So if you're haphazardly trying to create the habit of obedience, it's just not going to work so well. But if you spend a dedicated amount of time on it and really working on that one trait over the course of 6 weeks, then I feel like your results are going to be that much better, and hopefully there'll be a lot more peace in the family. So there are so many different techniques on habit forming, and there's so many character traits that are suggested in the Charlotte Mason books. I highly encourage you to check them out. All right, so those are some of the pointers that I wanted to share on how we are teaching / disciplining / raising our children. I probably won't be using the word discipline that much in any future videos. It is simply here to explain how we're raising our children, but really I think of discipline as teaching or as natural consequences. Okay, so I would love to hear your thoughts on how you raise your children, how you discipline your children, if you do, if you don't, if you have the same idea as me and you choose to use natural consequences and discipline as a teaching tool. I would love to hear all about that down in the comment section below. And if you want to check out some of my other videos on my channel, I've left a couple of them here for you to enjoy. And if you want to see what we're up to on a daily basis in our homeschool or in the summer or on the weekends, you can find me on Instagram at Pepper and Pine.